A man's profession often crawls deep into his skin and becomes a part of his character. What good is a politician who doesn't lie, and what good is a lawyer who doesn't manipulate the truth? The Netflix miniseries, Anatomy of a Scandal, revolves around these two principal characters who are both hiding the truth. While one of them is in complete denial of it and bluntly lies straight on the face, the other one is a bit in the gray area and is not lying, but struggling with the truth that has tormented her throughout the years. And thus, the narrative asks the question, will their truth ever come out? Based on Sarah Vaughan's fictional novel of the same name, Anatomy of a Scandal, in 6 long episodes, follows a court case where a minister of the British Parliament, James Whitehouse, is accused of sexually assaulting his parliamentary researcher cum lover, Olivia Lytton. While the plot revolves primarily around a courtroom drama in search of the truth, one aspect that distinguishes it from other series is its discussion of wealth, privilege, and, most importantly, consent to a physical relationship. Like Olivia's lawyer, Kate Woodcroft, a Queen's Counsel, rightly quotes that even in modern society, it is still hard for people to understand the concept of consent, which is evident from the fact that they live in a country where marital rape was not legally considered rape until 1991. James Charles Whitehouse is an MP for the ruling Conservative Party, managed by his close friend and party leader, Tom Southern. James lives in London with his wife, Sophie, a literature graduate whom he met at Oxford University, where they studied together. The couple is living a peaceful life with their 2 kids, Finn and Emily, until a tragedy strikes. 5 months ago, in May 2018, James started an affair with an employee, Olivia Clarissa Lytton, who worked as a parliamentary researcher in his office. Due to some guilt or some other reason, James ended the relationship on October 5, 2018. On October 12, a week after the affair ended, James sexually assaulted Olivia in a lift at the House of Commons, and finally, after 2 weeks, Olivia decided to report the case to the police. As the series begins, only the news of the MP's illicit affair breaks into the media, and James' only conflict is to face the public and his wife, Sophie, who starts getting anxiety and panic attacks as soon as the truth is revealed to her. In the meantime, James' allies, especially the PM, Tom Southern, show their support for his close friend from Oxford University and refuse to take any drastic measures against him. James, with his wit and charm, tries to settle the dust when suddenly he finds out that Olivia has accused him of a sexual assault, and a QC named Kate Woodcroft has taken up her case. Soon after, James appears before the court and pleads not guilty, which prompts a court case to be initiated. In the presence of a jury, James' lawyer, Angela Regan, and Woodcroft discuss the minutes of the intimate event that took place on October 12 to find out whether the defendant is guilty or not. Was James Whitehouse guilty? It is hard to understand wealth and privilege when you are born with it, and that was exactly the case with MP James Whitehouse. He was an arrogant narcissist who had convinced himself that he couldn't possibly do any wrong to any person in the world. James believed that all his intimate encounters were 100% consensual, which isn't exactly a lie that he had been telling the world, but more of a flawed understanding of the concept of consent itself. In Olivia's case, he believed that, because he had once shared a consensual relationship with her, he could possibly do anything with her, and it would have her consent. Like a true politician and indeed a great one, James shamefully lied in his statement, made in front of the jury, and, like a vulnerable lover, expressed his feelings for Olivia to convince everyone in the court that whatever he did with her in the lift was an act of passionate romance between them, and Olivia desired it too. Again, he lied to the jury that he didn't hear her saying the words, "not here," and asking him to move away. He lied about a lot of other facts to protect his so-called privileged and elite status, and to everyone's nightmare, the jury bought his lies and found him not guilty of the assault. All the charges against James were dropped soon after. However, his own wife, Sophie, was certain by then that her husband was nothing but a wolf hiding in a sheep's skin, and she needed to take action against him, at least for the sake of her old friend, Holly Berry. Who was Holly Berry? How was she related to Kate Woodcroft? Holly Berry was a literature student who studied at the same university as James and his wife, Sophie. She was Sophie's first-year tutorial partner and a close friend who used to make notes for Sophie while, in the meantime, Sophie hung out with James. Holly was a sophisticated student who lived in her own domain, and like many other girls in the university, she had a crush on the Oxford Blues athlete, James Whitehouse. In the university, James and his close friend, Tom Southern, were part of a social elite group called the Emerta of the Libertines. The name is suggestive enough to point out their actions, as the group was themselves involved in numerous unspeakable acts. During a party at the end of the first week in June, Tom brought heroin to a private party of the Emerta of the Libertines and shared the drugs with a friend named Alec. When James found Tom doing drugs on the terrace, he quickly snatched the stash and took Tom to his room. On their way out, while on the streets, Tom found Alec standing on the edge of the terrace, and, under the influence of the substance, he motivated Alec to jump. Alec didn't think for a moment, and did as Tom commanded. Alec died on the spot, and suddenly James decided to run away from the crime scene to save Tom from being arrested. James convinced Tom to forget the incident while, in the meantime, he got rid of the evidence, i.e., the drugs that Tom brought in. To stay away from an inquiry and save his bright future, James decided to get an alibi for the night and suddenly remembered his girlfriend, Sophie. However, while walking towards Sophie's room, James collided with Holly Berry, who was also under the influence of alcohol. The word collided was highlighted specifically in Anatomy of a Scandal because it triggered something inside James, after which he would often lose control of his morality and transform into some kind of beast. That night, James not only collided with Holly Berry, but also tried to force himself upon her, just like he did with Olivia Lytton. He lost control, got violent, and when Holly tried to resist him and push him away, he called her the exact same words that he used for Olivia. After the traumatic experience, Holly left the university and transferred to Liverpool, while her mother lied to everyone in the university that she had moved to Australia. She didn't want the scandal to become public, so she drank the poisonous bile, suffocating herself from the agonizing experience, which she never discussed with anyone except an Oxford friend named Alison. That single assault tormented Holly all these years, and its effect was visible in her relationships. That probably justifies her affair with Senior Richard, whom she was only dating because he was unavailable. Holly was running away from the truth in herself, as a result of which she developed some hatred for her name itself, and thus, when she moved to London, she adopted her middle name, Kate, and used her ex-husband's surname, Woodcroft, to carve a new identity called Kate Woodcroft. On the outside, Kate and Holly Berry weren't the same people, but on the inside, they were both struggling with the same truth or the assault. How did Sophie find out Kate's secret? During the Queen versus James Whitehouse case, an administrator from Oxford reported to the police that during his time at the university, James assaulted a girl, but the girl didn't want to file a complaint, and thus the matter never came to light. As soon as Sophie heard about this acquisition, she recalled an incident in the university when her close friend, Holly Berry, suddenly left the university without giving any reason. Sophie started looking for Holly after that, and during the court trials, she saw Kate Woodcroft's left-handed scribbling and color-coded notes, which was similar to the kind of style that Holly Berry used to do while she prepared notes for Sophie in the university. At first, when Sophie confronted Kate, she denied knowing any girl with the name Holly, but later, when Sophie visited Alison, she mistakenly spilled the beans. Kate feared that if Sophie revealed her real identity to James or the press, it would end her career, but fortunately, Sophie understood her friend's plight. Was James convicted for his crimes? What happened to Kate and Sophie? James might have won the case, but eventually, he lost his family. Sophie could look through James' lies, who used to manipulate the truth, as per his convenience. She believed that maybe James was raised that way, a privileged child who wasn't told in the initial years that cheating in a simple thing like a game of Monopoly was indeed unethical, and thus, Sophie didn't want her kids to end up like their father. Her son was already taking pride in being a Whitehouse. That compelled Sophie to take the drastic step and leave James before it was too late. It was hard for Sophie to take the step because she had lived her entire married life in James' shadow, but soon after James' scandal came to light, she repented that decision every day from that point on. She knew that James only knew how to use people to serve his narcissistic desires, the same way he used Sophie during college to get an alibi for Alex's accident, and later used the same favor to gain Tom Southern's trust. As soon as Sophie left James, she arranged a meeting with Holly Kate and finally asked her why she didn't report James' assault to the police. Kate explained that James was a privileged and honorable student at the university, and no one would have believed her. This detail was important because the same thing happened in Olivia Litton's case, where there was substantial evidence, yet the jury decided in favor of the charismatic MP. And it was at that point when Sophie revealed that James might be able to evade a scandal due to the blurriness of the concept of consent, but he would not be able to save himself from the accusations of being an accomplice to a murder. Sophie contacted an acquaintance in the press and informed him or her about James and Tom's involvement in Alex's accident and how James tampered with the evidence to protect Tom. Soon after, the police arrested James Whitehouse and Tom Southern, but their fate wasn't revealed in the end, whether they would be convicted or not. Fortunately, in her statement, Sophie didn't expose Kate or her real identity, and thus, in the closing sequence of Anatomy of a Scandal, we see her attending the court session with a fresh demeanor. Sophie, on the other hand, moved to Sussex with her 2 kids to live a peaceful life away from James' shadow. Does James know that Kate is Holly? While James is battling the rape allegations brought against him by Olivia, he discovers that an Oxford administrator has come forward to tell the police that a fellow student had accused him of rape while he was at Oxford. When he asks where the student is now, he is told that she left the country. The accusation doesn't hold much ground without the presence of the alleged victim herself. When James and Sophie are told that it was Holly Berry, the former claims that he doesn't remember her. However, the latter recognizes that name. Holly was Sophie's Anglo-Saxon tutorial partner. Sophie took advantage of her by making her do her classwork. Sophie starts to change from that point in the show. Cracks begin to appear in the seemingly impenetrable belief she has in her husband. His affair broke her heart, but she decided to stand by him. Even when Olivia accused James of sexual assault, Sophie refused to believe it, merging her thoughts with James' claims. After learning about the second accusation, Sophie begins questioning the possibility. This is a girl she actually knew from beyond the life that she and James built together. She can't choose to ignore her the way she does with Olivia. Meanwhile, James initially keeps claiming that he doesn't remember Holly, but that can be a lie. On the morning of the day he is about to be questioned by Kate, he remembers exactly who Holly is and what he did to her. It is during the questioning that James figures out that Kate is actually Holly. She had hidden herself well by using her middle name and her former husband's surname. However, when she brings up the phrase that he allegedly told Olivia "don't be such a tease," he immediately realizes who she is. He said the exact same thing to her all those years ago in that dark Oxford corridor. Any other criminal would be terrified after learning that their prosecutor is also their former victim, but James' sense of entitlement is so massive that he doesn't think he did anything wrong. Not with Olivia nor with Holly. He even starts counterattacking Kate, letting her know that he has figured out her real identity. Moreover, he subtly threatens her by pointing out that her actions are unethical. Ultimately, James chooses not to make the revelation about Kate public. He likely knows that if he tells the media and authorities about Kate, it can potentially lead to fresh investigations against him. It is in James' interest to let people keep believing that Holly is not in England. Is Anatomy of a Scandal a true story? No, Anatomy of a Scandal is not based on a true story. It's the television adaptation of the eponymous 2018 novel by Sarah Vaughan, the pseudonym that British author and journalist Sarah Hall uses. However, certain elements in the show, as well as the book, were inspired by real interactions and institutions. For instance, the Libertine fraternity is reportedly inspired by the Bullingdon Club, a real and controversial all-male dining club at Oxford University. Sarah is an Oxford alumna herself, and has worked at The Guardian for over a decade as a political correspondent, health correspondent, and senior reporter. Since leaving The Guardian, she has been active in the freelance sector. Sarah has always wanted to write a book like Anatomy of a Scandal, and has no qualms in declaring that she felt more passionate about it than all other things she had ever written. The book is reportedly based on Sarah's years of experience as a political correspondent for one of the most prestigious publications in the world. Sarah has written on her blog and stated in various interviews that a 2004 telephonic conversation with Boris Johnson, right after he was fired by the then Conservative leader Michael Howard from his positions as vice chairman and shadow arts minister for reportedly lying about his alleged affair with Spectator columnist Petronella White, served as an inspiration for Anatomy of a Scandal, a novel about an Oxford-educated British politician at the epicenter of a sex scandal. However, the author clarified that James is definitely not based on Johnson. Not that Boris is in any way my fictitious James Whitehouse, a man accused of raping a parliamentary aide with whom he's been having an affair in a lift in the House of Commons, Sarah wrote on her blog. For one thing, James is an athletic, former Oxford rowing blue who is conventionally handsome with his chisel jaw, green eyes and 6'3" rower's frame. For another, for all his faults, I never thought the former Foreign Secretary Johnson abusive at all. What really piques Sarah's interest is Johnson's attitude toward truth. James as a character was developed from that. According to Sienna Miller, Sophie, who was at the epicenter of a scandal herself in 2005 after her then-fiancé Jude Law admitted that he had an affair with his children's nanny, Anatomy of a Scandal is a commentary on the disastrous effect of entitlement. If you look at our government, David Cameron and Boris Johnson, and all of them went to Eton College, and then they all went to Oxford, and they are friends, the American Sniper actress told Vanity Fair. She further added, they've been given the best education, the best leg up in life from the start. I sort of feel like they, in moments, have acted with impunity or a different set of rules for them than for everybody else. Incidentally, both Johnson and Cameron are past members of the Bullingdon Club. The book spawned out of this conversation, and in 2020, Netflix announced that it would be developing a series out of the book. Plans have reportedly been made to develop future seasons based on other scandals, including high-profile members of the public. In the post-number MeToo era, Anatomy of a Scandal strives to tell a story about consent, politics, and entitlement and is therefore incredibly relevant. So, it's perfectly understandable if someone thinks that Anatomy of a Scandal is based on a true story, even if that isn't really the case.